A British parliamentary committee has released a damning assessment of the UK's intervention in Libya in 2011. It says the government failed to develop a coherent strategy when it joined France and the US in the military campaign that helped to topple Muammar Gaddafi. Gracie Jerome takes a closer look.
We must keep on with the NATO mission until civilians are all protected and until this work is finished. We will help you to find Gaddafi and to bring him to justice.
In March 2011, the UK and France led NATO's military intervention in Libya. They were confident that overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi was key to bringing peace to the country. But they failed to plan for the aftermath, and the power vacuum that followed Gaddafi's fall left room for sectarian war and later the rise of Daesh. Now British MPs are condemning the former Prime Minister's decision to intervene.
The decision makers here were being presented with a blood-curdling assessment as to what was going to happen in Benghazi and therefore the need to act. It was in that climate that decisions were taken, not on the basis of a cool, calm analysis of exactly what the situation was and what the right response would be.
A Foreign Affairs Select Committee says there was no evidence the UK carried out a proper analysis of the nature of the rebellion in Libya, and that a lack of planning drifted a mission designed to protect civilians into a policy of regime change by military means. The panel's blaming Cameron's decision to follow France into Libya for the country's economic collapse, descent into tribal warfare, and the humanitarian crisis that's followed. They say the coalition failed to identify the extremist element of the 2011 uprising, and that the rise of Daesh shows that the coalition hasn't delivered on its promise
to take the dangerous weapons out of Libya.
US President Barack Obama first showed unity with Cameron.
We have worked closely together to help bring about freedom and peace in Libya.
But has since called the coalition's next move the biggest mistake of his presidency.
Probably failing to plan for the day after what I think was the right thing to do in intervening in Libya.
The UK Foreign Office is defending the intervention. It says it was an international decision, not just a British and French one. But 5 years after the fall of Gaddafi, Libya is still marred in political chaos, with many groups fighting for control. Gracie Jerome, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Cambridge in the UK is Rhiannon Smith, who's Managing Director of Libya Analysis, a website and consultancy. Thanks so much for joining us, Rhiannon. This was sort of a Chilcot report for Libya. Any surprises for you in that report?
I don't think it was particularly surprising, particularly given, this report has come out after Cameron is no longer Prime Minister. I think Theresa May is trying to kind of wipe the slate clean, and she can, blame what happened in Libya on Cameron rather than her own sort of administration. But I think, all the things that are in this report, these are things that we've known for a long time. This report has come out 5 years after the initial intervention, so a lot of the things that are in this report are nothing new.
You seem to be suggesting that they might be somewhat unfairly pinning the blame solely on David Cameron.
Yeah, I think, when the UK intervened in Libya, as was mentioned in your report there, I think there wasn't necessarily enough evidence. There were, quite a few assumptions that were incorrect. But at the same time, you had this spectre of full-scale massacre in Benghazi, and I think there wasn't really time to consider, the ins and outs, and I think they really acted to try and protect the civilians of Benghazi. Yes, we followed France into that, but I think it's very easy in hindsight to say, well, what were the other options?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, they speak about missed opportunities, the fact that Tony Blair perhaps knew Muammar Gaddafi or had some sort of line of communication. The LSE ties with Saif al-Gaddafi. The report doesn't specifically mention this, but the Gaddafi family even directly funded LSE. But you would expect them, during that context, at that time, to want to distance themselves from Gaddafi at a time when he's massacring civilians, right, in Benghazi. Is the report being a little bit, I guess, overtly hopeful that they could have found these direct lines of communication back then?
I think so, yes. We have to remember at the time when the no-fly zone was initiated, there was a call for this from the Arab League. It was quite different to the way, the NATO intervention in Iraq or Afghanistan. There was a direct call for this, which the UN followed up with the resolution 1973. And yeah, so I think it is quite different in that respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the African Union as well was sort of sidelined. I remember former South African President Thabo Mbeki trying to mediate, and they told him, no, stay home. At the crux of all of this, what's the message to the British people? That going into Libya was a mistake and it was wrong, or the message of the report is we should have gone in, but we messed it up thereafter, and we didn't stay to clean up the mess, or we didn't stay to rebuild the country? Which one is it?
I would say it's more so the latter of those. Mm-hmm. I think one of the big messages of the report, which I think is accurate, is that, Libya is an incredibly complex place. You only have to look at what is going on now. You have parallel governments, parallel institutions, parallel oil institutions, parallel banks. You have a whole plethora of different militias aligned to different political parties. And I think what this report, one strong message in it, which is the case, is that we didn't really understand what we were getting into in Libya. We went in saying, OK, we're going to try and protect the civilians. And then obviously it spiraled and it did change. One thing I would say, though, I think one of the messages in the report is that, we didn't do enough afterwards to support the state building. And while that is true to a degree, you have to remember that at the time on the ground in Libya, in the early days of the revolution, 2011, 2012, the message from the Libyan people was very much, actually, we don't want outside support. We want to do this by ourselves. We want it to be a Libyan solution. So as much as, yes, we should be able to understand the situation better and make efforts to understand it better and build our support and political consensus based on that, I think at the time there was definitely a reluctance to get involved in the kind of nation building which took place in Iraq, which obviously was quite disastrous. And there was this message from the Libyan people. So I think it's quite important to remember that as well.
OK, Rhiannon Smith, thank you very much. Good to talk to you.